Okay, it looks like we're recording. So welcome everyone. Again, I am Lou Thompson, they, them, or she, her pronouns with Serve Washington. And today we're all here to talk about data, member demographic data and other data that you may be collecting or would like to collect on AmeriCorps applicants or members. And I will give kind of a brief introduction because we have talked about this topic on previous program staff meetings, but it's possible that not all of you were able to be a part of those initial calls. So I'll just kind of give a recap and orient us to what this is all about. And then we have Laura Schlebach from WCC, who is going to share a bit about what Washington Conservation Corps does in this area to get our conversation going. But really, we're hoping this is going to be a really interactive discussion where we hear from you and you can share things about what you're doing or what you would like to do or questions that you have for one another, how we can support you, all of those kinds of things. We'll see how much we can cover in this hour. And again, we will record the first about 45 minutes and leave some time at the end for parts that are not recorded if anyone has questions or wants to share. So let's talk a little bit about the member data. So this conversation, we started having this conversation at Serve Washington over the summer, and we have been working with AmeriCorps, the agency, to try to get member exit data, because I know they collect some of this data that we're interested in getting for Washington State, so that we can learn more about who are our members, who are our programs engaging, which members are we able to retain, and so that we can improve both like member recruitment and our outreach, but also like the member supports that we're able to offer. And so we know that AmeriCorps is collecting some of this data, and we're trying to figure out how to get that in a timely way. So we started this conversation back in July and found out how many of you are already actually collecting some really awesome data, just different demographic data, or maybe how applicants or members heard about your program that could be really useful, in particular to advance our equity work as a field. And so we have spoken to a handful of programs and have learned more about the really cool things that you're doing and learning, and we are learning from you, and very excited at the work that's being done, and wanted this conversation to happen so that you can hear from each other and learn from each other. So with that sort of intro to what this is all about, I will have Laura share. And after Laura shares, we will open it up to questions and discussion and see where we can go from there. But Laura, would you like to present on what WCC is collecting and doing, and why and how? And
Sure. Thanks for the intro and providing some context. I'm Laura. I use she, her pronouns, and it's great to see many familiar faces and names. I am going to share my screen, and bear with me while I try and get my notes available to myself as well. All right, can I get a verbal confirmation on seeing the full screen of my presentation?
yes, looks great.
Okay, thank you. All right. Like I mentioned, I'm Laura, and I'm actually going to pause again while I hide thumbnail videos. All right, I'm here to share a bit about our journey at the WCC in collecting demographic data about our applicants and members. And I also want to be clear up front that we are on this journey with all of you. We are constantly learning and are by no means experts on this. I think talking about where we're at, what we've learned, learning from and with each other is a great way to connect and support each other as AmeriCorps program. So thank you to Serve Washington for inviting us to share, me to share with all of you today about what we're doing with WCC. For those who might not be familiar with the Washington Conservation Corps, here are just a few glimpses of what our members do. We are an AmeriCorps program housed within the Department of Ecology. And through AmeriCorps, Washington Conservation Corps provides environmental career enhancement opportunities to young adults and those with military service. We have 51 field crews, 15 individual placement members, and over 50 experienced staff who helped guide environmental projects and provide mentorship to our AmeriCorps members. So here you can see some of the different types of projects our members complete. We are out there planting native species, often along rivers and streams. We're out there removing invasive species. We build and increase accessibility on trails. And we also serve on disaster response, which lately has primarily taken the role of local flood response and COVID-19 community support. So that's the top middle photo, somebody at one of the vaccine distribution centers doing some counting. And sorry for the sun, I can't bear to put the shade up because sun in the winter is so lovely. With such a large program with over 285 members, we needed a database that can house a large volume of files to also support retention requirements. So when we think about how we collect our data, data as it relates to applications and member files, this all takes place within Secure Access Washington. So because we are housed within a state agency, we were able to work with a database developer to build a member application system and database to store these electronic member files. And since our crew supervisors schedule interviews with potential members and make selections through interview panels, we made sure supervisor input was a key part of the database design, and we incorporate their feedback into annual enhancements to improve the user experience for both applicants and supervisors and our admin team, who are frequent users of our database. So thinking about the why, there's so many aspects to this, but a primary driver is thinking about reducing barriers to service. That was the theme of one of our recent national service conferences, actually. Looking intentionally about who is able to serve, who is applying, who is enrolling, and who we are losing and who are we keeping during the service year in terms of retention. Those are important pieces of holding ourselves accountable to doing everything we can as a program to reduce barriers to service and to enroll members who reflect the communities we serve. And this also goes beyond enrollment. So thinking about the member service experience, if we're looking at creating a culture where everyone can thrive, a service environment where everyone can thrive, looking at member demographics, we can get different pieces of who might need different types of things in terms of support and learning about what we can do to better provide that support for them, also with their input and feedback. So one example of this is providing affinity group space based on demographics. And just a little bit of personal sharing. The first time we did this in a program-wide way, that made a really big difference for me as a staff member is when we offered 4 years ago a gender equity conference for supervisors and staff who opted in. And since the environmental arena is traditionally male dominated in terms of jobs, this provided a really important space for women and non-binary folks to gather together and create community and through shared experiences together. So a lot of ideas were shared around how can we do this for members too. So another similar member-focused project around this was delayed during COVID, but this summer we're offering 2 affinity group backcountry trail projects for members of systemically marginalized groups as a way of supporting their particular member experience. And we also use this data to see if we can ascertain information about outreach strategies. So if we dedicate particular outreach efforts to a certain region due to low application numbers, what type of results are we seeing? Using that information can help us make sure we're constantly learning and improving our strategies. We also want to track change over time to hopefully see improvements, but also noticing trends and improvements as it relates particularly to diversity and the breadth that can encompass. So there are many ways to collect data, and so we also collect an end of year survey that collects qualitative data that we use. And qualitative data is really fascinating to me, and I'll mention that data visualization is an area, room for growth for us in terms of consistently reporting out on all of this. So we do collect data on applicants and also enrolled members. And we work with our developer to sort of export that batch data in terms of applicants. So we can also look at how they found out about our program and have that influence our outreach strategy. We also have data available on retention. Let me see here. Yeah, we generally collect data available listed here. And we do have an age exemption for those with a mental or sensory disability, in addition to employment status previous to service. So just making a couple of notes there. We try and compare demographics of applicants compared to those selected as members, as I mentioned, to continue learning and growing in our goal of reducing barriers to service and providing service experience for those who reflect the communities we serve. And we try and compare to local data. We are a statewide program. And in addition to this, I'll mention our exit data. We collect a high level indicator of why they ended their term. If it's an early exit, to try and gain information there. And we have sort of high level categories to also respect member privacy. So I pulled a few stats for today. We have seen more diversity in member identified gender over the last few years. A lot more folks listing their gender as genderqueer, non-binary, and more who identify as female. When I think about the role this plays in member experience, I also think about representation in crew supervisors. I should say we as a WCC staff. We're thinking about members being able to see themselves reflected in leadership positions as being really important. And, this takes time. It's taken years to transform our hiring process in terms of equity, improving equity there. And of course, we continue to learn along with everyone else in this process. Lots more great work to do. And it's important to recognize improvements along the way. So I'm excited to share that our crew supervisors have seen a significant increase in those who identify as female and also those who identify as queer. And in promotional positions for supervisors, this has recently doubled, which also shows that we were lacking that before, and that we have a a set number of promotional positions for our crew supervisors. So again, we're also trying to reassess how can we expand promotional positions for our supervisors too. And then since 2018, it was really exciting to see some jumps in applicants who identify as Hispanic, and then those who identify as 2 or more races. So looking ahead, this year we're looking forward to crunching more numbers on our applicant and member data. We had some staffing transitions this year, so and we're approaching training a little bit differently this spring. So we're excited to get through those trainings and dive a little deeper this spring as we approach our summer recruitment. Another thing we're excited to do is edit our member application to expand the gender options available. We want to avoid harm where we can, and we want to learn if we do inadvertently cause a member to have a negative experience with our application process. So along those lines, we want to streamline our paperwork wherever we can for many reasons, but also if someone is, for example, going through a transition, struggling with gender identity and having to add that field multiple times, that could be really difficult. So we're trying to be efficient and think about what role each field on our paperwork is serving. And we also think about context. So for example, if we ask for gender and pronouns on our training survey, perhaps adding that we're asking for that so we can ensure inclusive options for lodging or preparing name tags. That gives members more context for that particular ask. And that is what I prepared for you all, short and sweet. I'm happy to answer questions. I may or may not know the answer. I will do my very best to respond. And again, thanks for allowing us to share just a little bit about where we're at with all of this.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's so cool to hear all the things that you're doing and the why behind it. I have maybe a question or two, but I will open it up to everyone else first. Let's see. Anyone, feel free to type in the chat or unmute your line.
I lost my chat, so I'm going to try and find it while you all think about any questions you may have.
This is Sandy with the Washington Service Corps. Thank you. I'm just curious, do you collect all this data in your database, the enrollment paperwork and the applications and everything?
We do, yes. And I'll say there's a caveat that if a member undergoes a name change during the year, or we otherwise find out information, we have a SharePoint site that we manipulate often for to view different information about a member or their service location. So we receive the information through our application database, and everything is stored there, and we can update a member profile there. And in addition to that, we have SharePoint that can also make sure we're using the member's preferred name, if for instance that differs from like what's on their ID or something like that.
Because I was just curious, I'm just curious how your database interacts with like your payroll and your time sheets and all that. If I'm clear offline, that's fine. I'm just curious, is all.
Yeah, great question. And I think it's a little bit unique for us since we're housed within the Department of Ecology. So our admin team works directly with our agency payroll department to make some documents on the application database available to payroll staff. So they're essentially able to flag certain documents, and then payroll logs in, or fiscal, and gets what they need. And then the admin team like unflags those files. And that was all created based on how can we streamline this process and get people the info that they need in an easy sort of way. So we use the e-time timekeeping system, and I don't know if that's what your agency uses.
No, the Employment Security Department, we're sort of self-contained within the Washington Service Corps. We do our own payroll. We do our own time tracker system that we have that ESD has helped us develop, but it's like self-contained. So anyway, but thank you. It's interesting to hear how other bigger programs do keep the data together.
Thanks for that offer, Laura, to share your PowerPoint slides as well.
Laura, at the end of your presentation, you kind of vaguely referenced how you're streamlining the enrollment paperwork, but you used a phrase that I think was something like starting to realize how we collect the data so that there's a value or a usage of it for the members. Can you explore that just a little bit more? Because it felt really intentional.
Yeah, let me know if this is what I was giving a couple of examples of on a training survey. If we include, if we ask again for their gender, I feel cognizant of the fact that we already collected that on our enrollment paperwork, and now we're surveying them for their elective training choices. So we offer a bunch of trainings. Is this along the lines of what you were?
Yeah, it felt to me like you were both saying, how do we actually use it so that like they have name badges, and how do we make sure we're not just collecting something every time we interact? And that's a really fine balance.
Yeah, it is a really interesting balance. And I think, so for us, when I help edit the training survey, if I notice something that we've already collected, I think about how can we explain why this is being requested again, or why we're requesting it here in particular. You know, if something, a piece of this is also the fact that people may have different responses at various points in the year. So maybe their preferences have changed for food, for pronouns, for lodging. So trying to also consider not over surveying, or not asking a question just to ask it again, but making sure if we are asking again that we're giving some context for how it would be used. I think it's tricky collecting data and then not doing anything with it can be tricky. So also having like transparent feedback around, we heard this from you, this is what we heard, and now these change, we're making these changes based on this information. So we're also internally, in terms of internal communication, trying to keep doing that to continue to build trust within not only staff, but members as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Laura, thank you so much for being here. I apologize if you answered this, but I'm curious if when you were reflecting on some increases in folks that are Hispanic or have multiple backgrounds or multiple identities, was there intention prior to that? Do you know what that was a result of? Are you, what is your goal or outcome? Is it purely representation based on community, or is there something else? Could you speak to any of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. That's a great question. For a number of years, I would say pre-2018, we were working with our translation teams at Ecology to translate our brochures and our flyers out to Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, and Korean. And I think the ecology translation teams they're expanding the languages offered as well. I think to include Amharic and additional, but our recruitment is difficult. We've had a hard time recruiting in Central and Eastern Washington, and so we're also trying to look at the demographics in those areas to make sure that we're trying to reach those folks. Like I think one summer instead of having supervisors opt into brochures in different languages, we just sent English and Spanish statewide. So again, we're still learning how to track like correlation, but our goals are generally improvement. We don't currently like set a quota. We're simply looking for increases, and so I would love to hear if other folks have navigated this as well, in terms of trying an outreach strategy and then figuring out, okay, we saw some increases here. Is it related directly to what we did this year with outreach? I also holding there's many different dynamics to recruitment seasons, like you all shared recently on the subgrantee meeting. Recruitment is difficult for AmeriCorps programs statewide. And so there's, I would say, rarely one single factor impacting a recruitment cycle, but there's many different dynamics. Ooh, getting bright.
Thank you for that. It actually made me warm I enjoyed seeing you in the sun.
I'm curious. I mean, you talked about different types of data that you're collecting, and a lot of this isn't something that you can like require that applicants or members provide. And I'm curious, do you usually get a pretty high response rate on when you're asking certain demographic questions? Like, what does that look like? And it sounds like you're working on like building trust and offering that context so they understand why you're asking certain questions. I'm sure that goes a long way, but just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't have specific percentages, but we do have some folks who leave the answers blank. But I would say more than half, definitely more than half answer that question. I would say probably closer to 70%. Do you provide that information to us? And I'm excited this spring to potentially sort of loop in our WCC DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion committee to sort of look at our member application, just because it's refreshing to look at something like that every couple of years and sort of look at the member data and see if we can just continue making improvements.
So I'll just maybe pivot a little bit. I really appreciate hearing from like how WCC does this. And I think this would or could look very different for each program. You're going to have different goals or maybe different barriers or things that you struggle with. And you pointed out some things maybe unique to your program about, maybe member crews, lodging and stuff, that might not be something that every program has to handle, or the field being very like historically male dominated, and how you're approaching that. So I know that it's helpful to think not just like this is how you do it, these are the things to collect and things to look for, but really this is what you've determined is important to your program for various and specific unique reasons. And some of them could be the same for other programs, but they might be different. And I'm curious if other programs have things to share just about like maybe what you're collecting or what you would like to collect that would be helpful for your program and how your program is designed and what your goals are. I don't know if anyone is willing to share or ask questions of others related to that.
I could share. Thank you very much. This has been really helpful and interesting. And our program, we work with the juvenile justice system, and we work with programs that serve young people involved in the justice system. And so one of the questions we ask on our application form, again, not required, but we ask people to disclose so we can see how we're doing, is we ask them to share what lived experience and identities they might hold that relate to the young people that we're ultimately targeting across our different host site organizations. So it's mostly populations that are overrepresented in the justice system, or if they have their own lived experience in the justice system. And that's something we're really trying to improve our recruitment of people. We have a lot of people, who disclose things like lived experience in homelessness and foster care, which are very common in the justice system. So that's been really interesting, collecting that information.
Great, thank you for sharing, Caitlin. And so you're collecting that at the time of application?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a great example of like some unique information that's really relevant to your program. Any others or questions for anyone who has shared?
Well, I'll just offer up maybe another reframe of some of the things that we've been talking about in Serve Washington, which are like, what specific equity goals might programs hold as far as representation and or like member supports, not necessarily meaning that you're actively doing that or know how to do that. But if anybody also would just like to share some of their goals, I think that would be beneficial for the group and for Serve Washington to learn.
This is Diane. I'm happy to share a goal. So the majority of the clientele we serve, aka students in the school district, K through 5 students, are Spanish speaking. So I've been really focused on tracking our bilingual members. We do have a few this year that are bilingual in languages other than Spanish and English. However, I am focused on that Spanish bilingual goal. So we have about a 50% bilingual team the last 2 service years. So I'm just always looking to increase that to, obviously the ultimate goal would be 100, but I know that's one thing I'm focused on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Diane. Others, any goals that you have?
Lou, we're also approaching about 20 minutes left of our session. If we want to consider ending the recording and opening it up for even more voices, if that helps.
Sure, we can do that. I will go ahead and stop the recording.